Welcome to the Executives Lounge. This is your podcast host, Christine Fauner. I am bringing you amazing stories from amazing women in leadership from across the globe. Let's get started. We finished out season 2 with kind of a callback to how this all began in my 20s. I get to sit down with Nicole and I, who I met when I moved to New York and I started a women's book club. I didn't start the book club because I loved books, although that's humongously a big part of my life. I started the book club because it was the first time in my adulthood as a woman that I recognized that I really needed women friends. I needed a women's support system. And so here we are, 15 years later, revisiting the start of that friendship and how much both of us have grown since then. I hope you enjoy this episode and the wrap up to season 2.
You mentioned being an entrepreneur, and there's quite a few of those in this community. And I do think the pandemic, maybe a silver lining, right? We try to find those silver linings in this moment of time. Entrepreneurship took off, and people wanted to be more autonomous, more independent, have more control over their lives. And I think that's such a cool thing that's happened. But I think those of us that have done so also know it's not for the faint of heart. It's hard.
Oh my God. I would be totally lying to you if I didn't say that there are moments where I'm like, should I just work again? Should I just get a corporate job? Like very real life example, my son is getting braces on Monday and it's a lot of money. And I'm like, my benefits are probably better if I got a job again. Not got a job, you know what I mean? Well, a W-2 or whatever, whatever. And I think about it, it's a very real thought that sometimes I have. Sometimes it's through the lens of panicking and like, oh my God, what am I doing? Why am I in this? And then sometimes it's in the lens of maybe it would just be easier. And most of the time I work through that moment by really understanding and recognizing my why for doing this. And showing myself a lot of grace, because in my profession in particular, in social worker and mental health, many of us are not even told that we can be business owners, even though we know private practice exists when we're in school. I was never told that was a job option. So I've been living in Charlotte for about 9 years. I came here with my son, who's 11 now, and his dad. And we moved here because, as you know, New York and surrounding areas is so difficult to live in financially, socially. It's exhausting sometimes. So we came down here. And at the time I was working in the university in higher ed still, doing crisis management and therapy with students. Fast forward to the pandemic and everybody had to retreat home. And I was fortunate enough to be able to work at home since my son was in school full time at home, and thought, well, I like this. I like this life. I don't really want to go back to an office. I don't want to go back to the higher ed setting anymore. I was actually on my way out anyway and paused the job search at that point. And a friend of mine who was a former student said, hey, I have a great referral for you. And I was like, great. I don't see clients like that. So she's like, well, you should. And I mean, it's as simple and as complicated as that, as somebody saying, no, but you can do this. You should do this. And I want to help you. I opened Blue Lotus with the intention of doing more consultation and training and not necessarily the one-on-one therapy, and then transitioned into the one-on-one work, specifically with other mental health providers. I've got 80% of my practice is working with other therapists. And that was very intentional because as a therapist in the field, many of us come with our own stories of what brings us into the work. The work itself is heavy and deep, and then we all have our own stuff we bring with it. So I've been in therapy on and off for many years and have found that working with other clinicians is not very easy sometimes. We are not always very easy clients because intellectually and logically we know what we know, but sometimes applying it to life, it's really hard. So I wanted to create a safer, braver space for other therapists so that we could really get down to the healing work that we need to do in order to be present for our clients.
When did you realize you had become an expert in your field?
That expert word always makes me so uncomfortable. So I feel like my evolution as a social worker, I think it really clicked when I moved to Charlotte. When I was in a role at the university that really allowed me creativity and space to, I think it was like the second person in the job. So I was able to like create it. And it was really working with interpersonal violence and education as well as crisis intervention. And it was the first time that I feel like other people had put me in that position of, we want your expertise. We want your thoughts and ideas. We respect and value and elevate your abilities. And we want you to just be like, get in there and create it. For me, it wasn't an internal switch. It was really from someone outside of myself saying, hey, we see this in you and we know that you can be great at this. So go ahead and run with it.
So often we're validated from external sources before we're willing to validate ourselves, I feel like.
100%. One of the trainings that I do is about imposter voice. I call it imposter voice, not syndrome, because syndrome implies there's something wrong with us, and there's not. Many of us learn that imposter or fraud voice from external sources, things that are systems and society and family and other messaging that doesn't come from us. So I always tell people I'm recovering. I'm a recovering imposter because now I have shifted more to learning much better how to talk about myself and what I can bring and what I do bring, and how we can work well together, and being very clear and concise, but also very discerning with setting boundaries with who and how I provide energy and work to. Energy wise, you want to make sure that you're compatible, I think, with anybody that you sit down with, whether it's a podcast or a training or a consultation or a therapy session.
The energy exchange is an interesting comment to make, because I think a lot of times, and I was just talking about this with somebody earlier today, that we as women tend to kind of give and provide for need and provide for need. Mm-hmm. And it's less common to say, actually, I'm going to sit in my own glory and give to myself.
Yeah. I have a sticky note that I keep in front of me that says, just because I can doesn't mean I should.
I say that all the time.
Yes. It's my reminder that my boundaries are important and they are valuable, and nobody else needs to understand them or accept them. I just need to use them. When I open the energy tap and don't close it up, then I have nothing left. It's a process to learn how to do that for yourself. And we're all going to do it differently because we all have different things that occupy energy and time and headspace, obviously, in our days. But I have found that I can run into burnout really quickly if I do not protect my space and energy.
Those boundaries around giving too much, I think you have to be so self-aware to know when to play that no really hard, because you can easily fall into, oh, I've given too much, I have none left. Mm-hmm. But are we aware enough to know where that border is?
It may not be ideal, it may not be perfect or close to perfect all the time, but the losing of yourself is real, and it's easy to just watch the thread of the balloon kind of just fly mm-hmm. away from you, and then you can't get it back.
I think I talk a lot about like the engagement and the intentionality around your practices, right? Your personal practice, your professional practice. That if we don't have that active engagement in our intentionality in our practices, we tend to lose ourselves in the activities instead of really thinking about the intentionality of the practices.
Being selective with the work that I do and the contracts I take on and the clients I take on, so that my energy is spent in a way that feels more reciprocated versus one way. And all of that is very intentional for me in the way I set up my personal business.
On hard days, I want to give it all up, for sure. It's way easier just to be a cog in the system and collect a paycheck, and do what needs to be done to find the comforts in life. And you're right too, that we have had dips and bows and curves and changes in the road. And I think as you get older, you realize like that's normal.
Yeah.
Making choices for yourself in the moment that help you continue on the path is going to be messy.
No. And I don't know when the moment was that dawned on me. Long time ago, probably having a kid, probably was like, oh wait, yeah. I have no control over anything.
Manual out the window.
In my work and just like talking to other therapists that I'm friends with too, like one of the themes that we're all experiencing is this sort of, I don't know what to say. It's almost like a rebirth of a new type of anxiety based in this sense of uncertainty. The pandemic brought in a different level of uncertainty that many folks never experienced before. Certainly there's groups in our world that have experienced that type of uncertainty of not feeling safe and secure in their space and in the space they take up in their home and their community. But this was a different level because this was not something that anybody had any semblance of control over. And now getting back to some sort of normalcy, everybody, all of us reach back for what we knew before, but there is a distinct pre and post in our lives, and there may not be a going back all the way. And that's hard to hold for some people. There is a grieving process that we all have to allow ourselves to go through, that like pre-pandemic, I used to do this and this, and I felt this way, or I was more social, or I was more able to be outgoing, or I wasn't exhausted by being in a crowd for X amount of time. And now post-pandemic, I am. And that for some people, those types of examples are really hard to reconcile.
Yeah, that's a good point. You know, the exhaustion in social settings, I think really for me, like it hit me hard coming back in. I was so busy and so social calendar driven before. And then I had an entire year of kind of isolation. Coming back into social settings has been exhausting, more exhausting. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, same. Absolutely. I have to really like build myself up to it in order to go. And sometimes, and I'm not talking about like necessarily new people, which is a whole different type of energy. Sometimes we have to expend. Sometimes it's just getting together with people I know and feel comfortable with.
I think the one thing that's been super interesting about starting this podcast is how many women or people in general, and they have a specific perception or definition of leadership. And what I love about doing the podcast is really blowing that out of the water and talking about the dynamic, diverse definition of leadership. And that's why I like using the words impact and influence versus power and control. Or, you know, when we exercise power and control, that is not leadership. When we exercise impact and influence and engage and invite others into that, that's leadership.
And what I tried to do was create space for growth, whatever that meant for that individual. And I think when leaders, no matter what role you're in, I think when you really take the time to sit down and really listening to understand versus listening to respond in meetings or in one-on-ones or in team groups or whatever. Like, meetings are expensive. We all know this. No matter what area of the business world you work in or career you have, we know this. And if you really want to create a community where people do empower themselves, you have to create space like for gatherings that are embodying the values that you want to put forth. And we start with ourselves. You know, when I was having a bad day, I might not have like told my staff every single moment of the bad day, but I would say, you know, I'm not my best self today. I'm really tired. I feel really low energy. I got a lot of stuff going on. I'm going to close my door for a little bit. If you need me, knock. It's okay. Rather than just close my door and shut myself off and not explain. And many people may disagree with that. Maybe that's too much. Maybe that's too much self-disclosure, whatever. I don't operate out of that space. I operate more of the space, more of the mind of it's better for all of us. Because for me, being transparent and being authentic is really critical for how I feel in alignment. I
absolutely love that. In your journey in leadership and stepping into that space of leadership, what is a resource that you could share with us that maybe has been foundational for you that would be really helpful for us to learn from?
Like I could probably list a lot of books, and honestly, the humans in my life who have done this before or who were instrumental in helping me feel, grounded in my choices as far as taking jobs or opening my practice or whatever. Those are the people that I rely on. And you can call them a mentor, or you can just call them people who are colleagues or friends. I really think it's important to be vulnerable and open with people in your world and not think that we have to do it all by ourselves.
I love this one for two reasons. One, for those of you that don't know, Nicole and I met because of a book club that I started in New York so long ago. And instead of recommending a book, because she knows and I know that we talk books all day long, we could pull books off of our shelves and recommend them all day long. But I love that you're calling out this resource that we tend to overlook, which is the people in our worlds, or the people that we need to seek out. Where's the gap? Where's the person I need to know?
Right.
As a resource for what I'm trying to do in my life, or what I'm trying to do in my work. I love that. And if there's a piece of advice that can be given from this conversation today, I feel like that's a good one. Finish up this podcast, enjoy the rest of it, and then go call a mentor, go call a person, go call a resource, and get that connection made.
I always feel very indebted, and I have such a deep sense of gratitude when people give of themselves to me. I have had so many beautiful experiences with the planning of this private practice with people who were like, here's my checklist that I created for myself to make sure that I did all the LLCs and taxes and I don't know, whatever, like all the stuff that I was like, oh God, I have to do that too, and I just bought him coffee and he handed it over to me. And like, so it's so simple. I mean, it really like you are worthy of being helped, and you don't have to always give it back. You can pay it forward, which is what I do.
I think that's a good reflection too, is for those of us that are experts in specific things, where are the places we could reach out and share that information or help somebody else come up with us? So I think too, when somebody offers you advice or offers you wisdom or offers support, they're not always looking for an exchange. It really is a gift. And I think we have a hard time sometimes believing it's really just a gift.
Yes. Always. Yes. I don't know where that comes. Maybe that's another podcast conversation of where that comes from.
It's like giving heart. Yeah, I wanted to talk about something before we end our time today. And that is, from the moment I met you, you were so passionate about crisis support, building community and resources. And I want to talk about that space with you for a minute, because I think it's a space that people shy away from. It's uncomfortable. It's discomfort. It's sometimes tricky. It can be triggering, all the things. I really want to give space to the space of crisis and what trauma and crisis really is. Yeah. And let's not shy away from that for a minute and talk about your expertise in that area.
Yeah. I mean, just to be transparent, the reason why I do what I do is because I grew up in a house with domestic violence and felt in crisis most of the time. And I think that it's when I work with trauma survivors, including myself, this is one of the superpowers that we build from surviving that and thriving through it. And it's a blessing and a curse, right? Like I can hold space in a very unique way for most interpersonal violence survivors or sexual assault survivors because I've been there. And it's also at the same time really hard to know that people are experiencing that same level of pain that I might have had. Much like working with other therapists can be tricky, I think it's important for other people to be seen and heard in a way that it can help them be brave as they work through their healing journey. If I didn't have to diagnose and I didn't have to put people in boxes, I wouldn't. I have to for insurance. But without that, if in a perfect world, not having to do that, it really is just about, God, just sitting with people and believing them when they tell you this is what they've been through, this is how it's impacted them. So many times we are not listening to understand someone's experience, and we are only listening to respond or question or judge. And that's not bashing anybody's character. It's kind of our human nature of like, let me problem solve, or let me get you here, let me do that. At the end of the day, there are tons of layers of trauma out there that I will never experience. I will never experience what it's like to be pulled over because I'm Black and think I might die, ever. And I can still hold space and believe that human being, that this is what their experience is, and create room for that person to heal and move towards healing.
Nicole, I'm so appreciative of that. I was really, thinking about where we come into our passion places, and then, what we learn about those topics, and then we become advocates. And for you to share that that's a personal story that touched you directly, and that's what really started you on this journey of being an advocate, I'm incredibly appreciative of. And I'm recognizing that that story is a really valuable and important one, and also a very, very personal one. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. No, I'm happy to, because I think if I'm saying that we need to be vulnerable, then I also need to go there.
We talk a lot about storytelling, and this entire podcast and the work that I do with women, the work that we all really do with each other is all about the storytelling and being heard and being seen, and being able to be validated in our stories, and being able to also change our narratives and change how we might really define ourselves in those stories. And I think that kind of space to be able to be seen and heard, and then be able to process that story out, I think is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
You will be able to find more information about Nicole and her business in our podcast description. And don't forget to click on the links. Her company's name is Blue Lotus Clinical and Consultation Services. And we'll have more info on that and resources in the podcast description for this episode. Nicole, I can't thank you enough for coming and sharing your story with us. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. What a wonderful way to reconnect after all this time.
I know. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us today in the Executives Lounge, where we bust open the doors, slam through the ceilings, and make sure that we have a spot at the table and that we are the lounge. You can find more podcast recordings and episodes at www.roamyoursoul.com. That's ROAM, roaming the world, finding amazing stories from amazing women, sharing their leadership skills and talents with us all over the globe.